The cafeteria on the orbital station was never silent. Metal trays clanged, claws scraped against plates, and deep growls rolled like thunder. But that evening, when the human walked in, every sound died. She was the only human on Station Karth, a stranger among the Vor'kai, a species of tall, furred, golden-eyed predators who believed strength was everything. Her name was Lieutenant Mara Hale. She was small compared to them, fragile-looking, with pale skin and tired eyes that had seen too many wars. She had survived battles that the Vor'kai only read about in reports, but here in their world none of that mattered. Here, she was the outsider. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and mineral smoke. The Vor'kai soldiers sat in groups, tearing into slabs of flesh with their claws. They laughed, snarled, and threw bones into waste bins that hissed as they dissolved. When Mara walked past, their laughter faded. "Why is she here again?" One hissed. "She hasn't earned her meal," another replied. "She eats what she did not hunt." "It dishonors the hall." Mara said nothing. She walked slowly toward the serving counter, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Her uniform, dark gray patched in places, hung loosely on her thin frame. She hadn't eaten properly in days. The cook behind the counter, a scarred Vor'kai male, met her eyes with no warmth. "Human," he said flatly. "No portion for you." Mara blinked, thinking she misheard. "I have clearance. I helped with the reactor maintenance today." He cut her off with a low growl. "You did not hunt. You do not eat." "The rule stands." Her throat tightened. Around her, soldiers watched, some smirking, others avoiding her gaze. She could feel their eyes heavy with contempt. Still, she kept her voice calm. Commander Threx approved. A loud snarl echoed from across the room. Commander Threx himself stood near the upper table, towering above the others. His fur was streaked with silver, his armor marked with old scars. When he spoke, his voice shook the air. "I approved your stay," he said, "not your feeding." Mara turned slowly to face him. "I've worked every shift. I repaired the ventilation systems. Threx stepped closer, his claws clicking against the floor. "Work is not the same as the hunt. We earn our meals by strength. He looked her up and down. "Earn pity." Mara felt the heat rise behind her eyes but forced herself not to show it. She stood straighter. "Then I'll earn it," she said quietly. Threx's lips curled in a cold smile. "Then hunt something human. Until then, starve." A low rumble of laughter spread through the hall. The Vor'kai soldiers looked at her like she was prey that had forgotten to run. Mara turned away, her jaw tight. She could argue, but it would only make things worse. She walked to an empty table in the corner, the same one she always chose, and sat down. Her stomach twisted painfully. She tried not to look at the food around her. Thick slices of flame-roasted meat, glowing fruit from the forest world, dark breads steamed with minerals. She folded her hands on the table and stared at the smooth metal surface. The room filled again with noise. Conversations resumed, but a few eyes still followed her, smaller ones, curious and round. At the far side of the cafeteria sat the Vor'kai cubs, a group of younglings barely half her height. Their fur was soft and patchy, their claws still growing. They watched her with tilted heads, whispering among themselves in their chittering tongue. They knew her. She had helped them once during the fire in the nursery wing. While others ran to save weapons and equipment, Mara had gone straight for the cubs. She had carried 3 of them out, coughing through the smoke, wrapping their small bodies in her own jacket. The cubs remembered that, even if the adults pretended not to. One of them, a golden-furred cub named Kiri, whispered something to the others. They looked at Mara's empty plate, then back at each other. Kiri stood up, holding a small piece of cooked meat in both hands. She took one step toward Mara. "Kiri!" A sharp voice cut through the room. The caretaker, a tall female Vor'kai, hissed. "Sit down. Do not feed the human." Kiri froze, her ears lowering. She looked at Mara helplessly. Mara managed a small smile and shook her head softly. "It's okay, little one, eat." The cub hesitated, then returned to her seat. Mara looked away, pretending it didn't hurt. The hours passed slowly. When the cafeteria lights dimmed for night cycle, the others left in groups, still laughing, still full. Mara remained at her table until the hum of the cleaning drones filled the silence. She stood, picked up her empty tray, and walked to the disposal chute. Her reflection looked back at her from the steel surface. Pale face, tired eyes, a soldier who looked more ghost than human. As she left the hall, she heard soft voices again. From behind the maintenance door, the cubs were whispering. "She will starve," one said in a high, trembling voice. "She saved us once," another whispered. Kiri's voice came last. "Then we feed her." Mara's quarters were small. A single room with a bed, a desk, and a tiny viewport showing the curve of the planet below. She sat by the window staring at the stars. She missed Earth. She missed the simple things, the smell of rain, the sound of human voices, a warm cup of coffee. Now all she had was silence. Her stomach growled softly. She ignored it, forcing herself to drink from her water flask. "Tomorrow," she murmured. "Maybe tomorrow they'll remember I'm part of this crew." But deep down she knew they wouldn't. In the cub dormitory, the young Vor'kai lay awake in their nests. Kiri couldn't sleep. The image of the human's empty plate wouldn't leave her mind. "She helped us," Kiri whispered to her brother. "She gave her coat when the fire burned the walls." The brother turned his head. "If the elders find out, they'll be angry." "Then they can be angry," she said. There was a spark in her eyes, small but brave. They waited until the caretaker fell asleep. Then one by one they crept out of their nests. Their claws made no sound on the metal floor. They moved through narrow corridors lit by faint blue strips. The station's hum was like a heartbeat under their feet. The cubs slipped into the kitchen through the air vents. They'd done it before, during play. The lights were low, the room empty. Steam rose from the cooling trays of leftover food. They worked together, small paws carrying chunks of meat and fruit, wrapping them in napkins, whispering to each other to stay quiet. Kiri held the bundle tightly. "Quick," she said. "Before the watchers see." The others nodded. They made their way through the corridor, heading toward the humans' quarters. Their tails flicked nervously. Mara sat with her head resting on her arm, half asleep, when she heard the softest knock. Once. Then again. She frowned. No one visited her this late. She stood and opened the door carefully, and froze. 4 small figures stood in the hallway, their golden eyes bright in the dim light. Each one held a piece of food, meat, fruit, bread. Kiri stepped forward and placed the bundle on her tray. "For you," she whispered. Mara's throat closed. No, I can't." Kiri pushed the food toward her. "Please, eat. You helped us." For a long moment, Mara couldn't speak. Her hands shook as she took the bundle. The smell of warm food hit her like a wave. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want to show. "Thank you," she said softly. The cub's ears flicked happily. She sat on the floor with them. They watched as she took the first bite, slow, almost afraid it would disappear. The meat was strange, spicy, but it was real. Warm. She hadn't realized how empty she'd felt until that moment. The youngest cub laughed, a tiny, chirping sound. Mara smiled through tears. "You're all going to get in trouble for this," she whispered. Kiri shrugged. "Maybe, but you won't starve." They stayed with her until the corridor lights flickered, signaling patrol time. Then they ran off, tails waving, whispering to each other to be quiet. Mara sat there long after they left, staring at the half-eaten food. She whispered to herself, "Kindness, from predators." She didn't know it yet, but that small act would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire station. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Inside, a quiet warmth began to spread, one that even Commander Threx could not stop forever. The station lights flickered into morning cycle, washing the cold corridors in pale gold. The alarms hummed softly, signaling another day of drills, another day of work, another day of pretending nothing had happened. But Mara Hale wasn't pretending. She woke to the smell of cooked meat and the faintest echo of laughter in the hallway. Cub laughter. On her small desk lay the leftovers from last night's secret visit. The food had gone cold, but to her it looked like treasure. She smiled faintly and whispered, "They actually did it." The memory of those tiny paws offering food warmed her chest. It was the first real kindness she'd felt since she arrived on Station Karth. But that kindness carried a weight, a dangerous one. Because if the Vor'kai adults found out, those cubs would face punishment. Mara gathered the remains, wrapped them carefully, and placed them in the recycler so no one would know. Then she stood before the mirror, straightened her uniform, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." When she stepped into the main deck, the stares returned. cold and sharp like blades. But this time she didn't lower her head. She walked straight to the control console, greeting the technicians with a nod. "Morning," she said. They didn't answer. Commander Threx stood at the upper deck, observing a hollow map of the nearby asteroid belt. His voice rolled across the hall like thunder. "Human," he called without looking at her. "The ventilation grid in Sector 3 needs repair." "Yes, sir," she said calmly. He turned then, golden eyes narrowing. "You look stronger today. Did starvation teach you discipline?" Mara met his gaze. "Starvation only teaches silence, Commander." I already knew that lesson. A few nearby soldiers growled, insulted by her tone. Threx said nothing. He only studied her, eyes unreadable. Then he turned back to the map. "Fix the grid, and stay out of the mess hall." Mara nodded once. "Understood." Sector 3 was silent and dim, a maze of pipes and cables. The air smelled faintly of oil and ozone. She moved through the narrow space, using her light to find the damaged section. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. But inside, her thoughts burned. How long can this go on? She could survive without their approval, but the cubs, they shouldn't suffer because of her. As she worked, she heard small footsteps behind her. Soft, hesitant. "Human?" a small voice whispered. Mara turned sharply and her heart melted. Kiri, the golden-furred cub, stood at the edge of the corridor, carrying a small metal canister. "Kiri, what are you doing here?" she whispered. "It's not safe." Kiri's tail twitched nervously. "We brought water. You forgot to drink last night." Behind her, 3 more cubs appeared, holding small containers of fruit paste. They looked proud, their eyes shining. Mara crouched, smiling gently. "You're going to get caught, you know." The smallest cub, barely up to her knee, squeaked. "Then we'll hide better next time." Mara couldn't help but laugh, quietly, softly, a sound she hadn't made in months. "You're impossible." She accepted the canister and drank slowly. The water was cool, sweet, filtered through their system. It felt like life itself. "Thank you." Kiri looked serious. "The elders say humans are weak. But you're not weak." Mara's smile faded. "I just don't like fighting for everything. Sometimes, kindness wins too." The cubs looked confused, tilting their heads. Kiri asked, "Kindness is a kind of weapon?" "Maybe," Mara said, smiling faintly. "The strongest one we have." Their little meeting didn't stay secret for long. Later that day, as Mara returned to her quarters, a shadow blocked her path. Commander Threx stood there, arms crossed, his armor glinting under the corridor lights. "You've been receiving visitors," he said coldly. Mara's pulse quickened. "Visitors?" "The cubs." His eyes narrowed. "They've been seen wandering outside the nursery at night, carrying food." Near your quarters, she stayed calm, though her heart hammered. "Children wander, Commander. Maybe they're curious." "Curious?" he growled. "They're defying the code. Feeding an outsider breaks the law of strength." Mara stepped closer, unflinching. "Maybe they see something you don't." Threx's jaw tightened. "Watch your tongue, human." "I have been patient." "Then maybe patience isn't what's needed," she replied quietly. For a moment, silence filled the hallway. The hum of the engine seemed to fade. Threx's golden eyes burned into hers, but beneath that fire something else flickered. Confusion, maybe even doubt. He turned sharply. "Stay away from them. You'll only make their lives harder." Then he walked away. Mara exhaled slowly. She knew he was right, but she also knew she couldn't push the cubs away now. They had chosen her, and she couldn't lose that light. That night she skipped dinner again. The cafeteria was too dangerous now. Too many eyes, too much suspicion. She sat in her quarters working on her datapad, trying to focus. But the silence pressed in, heavy and lonely. Then another soft knock. Mara froze. "No," she whispered. "Not again." But the knock came once more, gentle like a heartbeat. She opened the door, and there they were again. The cubs, all 4 of them, carrying a tray piled high with food. This time it wasn't stolen scraps. It was a full meal, roasted meat, fruits, even bread. They must have risked everything to get it. "Kiri, what did you do?" Mara whispered. Kiri grinned proudly. "We told the kitchen bots we were hungry. We just didn't say it was for you." The others giggled, trying to stifle the sound. Mara shook her head in disbelief. "You'll be caught. Then we'll run faster," one cub said with a tiny growl of courage. Mara sat down with them again. She shared the food, letting them take pieces, laughing softly as they purred and chirped. It was strange, sitting there on the cold floor, sharing alien food with small predators, and yet it felt more human than anything she'd known in months. For a while, the world outside didn't matter. There was only warmth, laughter, and the quiet sound of life. But every kindness leaves a trace. The next morning, as Mara walked toward the control deck, she noticed 2 security drones hovering near her quarters, their lenses glowing red. Her stomach tightened. They know. When she entered the hall, whispers followed her again, sharper this time, colder. Human thief. Broke the code? She makes the cubs soft. Mara ignored them. But when she passed Commander Threx, she saw it in his eyes and he'd already heard. "Come with me," he said, his tone like ice. He led her to the observation chamber. The holoscreen flickered to life, showing grainy footage. Her quarters, the cubs sneaking in, the food on the floor. Mara's heart sank. Threx said quietly, "You know what this means." "They're just children," she said quickly. "They were trying to be kind." He slammed his clawed hand on the console. "Kindness is weakness. It kills nations. It kills warriors. It kills us," she stood her ground. "And cruelty saves them." He stared at her, breathing hard. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "You don't understand what it means to survive." Mara met his gaze. "No, Commander. I understand it better than anyone." He could have reported her then. He could have punished the cubs, locked them away. But he didn't. He only looked at the screen once more, then turned it off. "Leave," he said quietly, "before I change my mind." Mara left without another word, but something in his tone stayed with her. It wasn't hate anymore, it was conflict. That night the cubs didn't come. The halls were empty, quiet, too quiet. Mara waited by the door, listening, hoping for a knock that never came. Then somewhere in the distance, a roar. Not from Threx, from one of the caretakers, angry, furious. Mara's blood went cold. She grabbed her jacket and ran toward the nursery. The doors were sealed, but through the small window she saw them, the 4 cubs huddled together, shaking as the caretaker shouted. The punishment rods glowed faintly. Mara's heart pounded. She didn't think. She just acted. She slammed her override code into the panel, forcing the door open. "Stop!" she shouted. Her voice echoed through the chamber. The caretaker spun around, eyes wide. "This is not your concern, human. They're just children." "They broke the code!" Mara stepped between them. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "Then punish me." "Not them." The caretaker froze. "You?" "I told them to come. I asked for the food." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The cubs looked up, their eyes wide with disbelief. Kiri whispered, "No." The caretaker hesitated, confused, torn between obedience and disbelief. Then she hissed, "This will go to the council." "I know," Mara said softly. As the alarm lights turned red across the hall, she looked down at the cubs, frightened, trembling, but safe for now. She gave them a small smile. "It's going to be all right." Kiri reached out a paw and gripped her hand. "We'll tell them the truth." Mara shook her head. "No, let me handle it." And as the security guards arrived, the narrator's voice would fade in over the scene. Kindness is a quiet rebellion. On Station Karth, it began with a stolen meal and ended with the courage to defy a code older than the stars. The alarms faded into silence. The nursery door sealed behind them, and the hum of the station seemed to stop. For a long time, Mara Hale stood there, her back straight, her heart heavy, waiting for the guards to speak. 2 armored Vor'kai soldiers flanked her, eyes glowing faintly in the dim red light. Between them, the cubs huddled together, trembling. Kiri looked up at Mara, her small voice breaking. "They said you'll be punished." Mara smiled softly, though her hands shook. "Then maybe they'll listen finally." The door slid open, revealing the cold, vast hall of the Vor'kai Council, an ancient chamber carved with symbols of war and victory. Torches burned blue along the walls, and at the center stood the elders, their fur silver with age, their eyes bright and sharp as blades. Commander Threx stood beside them, silent. The eldest counselor, Varn, raised his clawed hand. "Human," he said, his voice deep and echoing. "You stand accused of violating the code of strength, by accepting food not earned and by corrupting our young." Mara took a slow breath. If kindness is corruption, she said softly, then maybe your code needs to be rewritten. The hall erupted in growls and shouts. The cubs whimpered, hiding behind her legs. Threx barked a command and silence fell again. Varn's eyes narrowed. You speak boldly for one who is nothing. Mara met his gaze. I am not nothing. I'm just human. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd, as if they didn't understand what that meant. So she went on. Where I come from, she said, her voice steady. We learned that hunger doesn't only live in the stomach, it lives in the heart. You can feed yourself with pride, with strength, with victory, but if you forget compassion, you starve your soul. The words echoed in the hall, quiet but sharp. Even Threx's expression flickered, something shifting behind his golden eyes. Varn growled. You dare lecture us about the soul? You who begged for food like a cub? Mara's voice didn't shake. I didn't beg, I waited. I believed someone here might remember what mercy looks like. And they did. She looked down at the cubs. Your children remembered. When you did not, a hush fell. The elders exchanged glances. One of them, smaller, with a gentle voice, leaned forward. You mean the cubs fed you? Mara nodded. Yes, they did. And they taught me something too, that your people aren't heartless. Just afraid to seem weak. The soft-voiced elder murmured, afraid? But Varn slammed his staff against the ground. Enough, his voice thundered. The code stands above emotion. Weakness spreads like disease. The young must learn to obey us, not to feel. He pointed a claw at the cubs. They will be confined. The human expelled. The cubs cried out. Kiri stepped forward, shaking. No! We fed her because she saved us. We remember the fire. You didn't come? She did. The room froze. Threx's head turned sharply. What fire? Kiri's eyes filled with tears. The nursery fire. The alarms broke. Smoke came. Everyone ran. She carried us out. She pointed at Mara. She saved 4 lives that day. A stunned silence filled the council chamber. Even the flames in the torches seemed to still. Mara didn't speak. She simply looked at the floor, embarrassed by the attention. It wasn't heroism, she whispered. It was just right. Varn's face twisted in anger. A story told by children. We do not, but Threx interrupted him. It's true. His voice was quiet, heavy. I was on duty that night. The human breached quarantine protocol to enter the burning section, risked her own life to pull them out. The elders turned to him, shocked. Threx continued. When I asked her why, she said, because no one else would. Mara met his gaze. For the first time, he didn't look down on her. He looked at her like an equal. Varn hesitated, then slammed his staff again. Even if true, and she still broke the code. Threx turned toward him. Then the code is broken already. The hall went silent. He stepped forward, his massive frame towering over everyone, but his voice was calm. You call her weak. Yet not one of you entered the fire. Not one risked your own hide to save a cub. She did. And you would punish her for teaching your young compassion? He faced the crowd. Maybe strength isn't just claws and fangs. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's the will to protect others, even when it costs you. Mara's breath caught. The cub's eyes widened, tails flicking with pride. Varn snarled. You speak treason. Threx growled back, low and dangerous. I speak truth. For a moment, it seemed they might fight right there. The air was electric, every warrior on edge. Then the soft-voiced elder raised her hand again. Enough, she said. The code has guided us for centuries. But perhaps it has never been tested by a human heart. She turned to Mara. What do you ask of us, human Mara? Mara blinked, caught off guard. Ask? Yes, you stand before the council. What do you want? Mara looked at the cubs, their small faces full of hope and fear. She thought about hunger, about loneliness, about the long nights on this cold station. I want no one to go hungry, she said softly. Not because they are weak, not because they are different. I want your people to understand that strength and kindness don't fight each other. They build each other. The elder nodded slowly. A simple wish. A difficult one. Varn spat. She wants to change who we are. Threx looked at him. Maybe that's what we need. The council fell into argument. Voices overlapping, claws striking the floor. The cubs clung to Mara's uniform, trembling. At last the elders called for silence. Varn glared at them all, but the decision had already shifted. The code remains, the soft elder said. But we will not punish mercy. The human's actions will stand as example, not crime. Varn hissed, you make us soft. She replied gently, no, we make ourselves whole. The gavel struck. The judgment was done. Outside the chamber, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Mara walked slowly into the corridor, the cubs following close behind. She didn't feel victorious, just relieved. Threx caught up to her at the end of the hall. For a long moment they said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he held out something. A metal tray, steaming. Her eyes widened. Commander? It's yours, he said gruffly. The council's order. You've earned your meal. Mara stared at it. Roasted meat, bright fruit, real bread. She hadn't seen a full plate like that in weeks. She looked up at him. And the cubs? He glanced behind her. They eat with you. The cubs squealed in joy, tails flicking wildly. Mara laughed. An honest, bright laugh that filled the corridor like sunlight breaking through a storm. Threx's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Humans, he muttered. Always breaking rules. Sometimes rules need breaking, she said softly. That evening in the great hall of Station Karth, the sight was something no one had seen before. At one table, once empty, a human sat surrounded by cubs. They ate together, shared stories, laughed quietly. Even some of the adults watched from a distance, uncertain yet curious. Commander Threx stood nearby, pretending to check reports, but his eyes stayed on them. When the youngest cub tried to hand Mara an extra piece of meat, he didn't stop her, and slowly other soldiers began to join in. One offered her a cup of broth. Another placed a slice of fruit on her tray. No words were spoken, but something old and frozen began to melt. Later that night, Mara sat by the viewport, the cubs asleep around her. The stars outside shimmered like a sea of quiet fire. She whispered to herself, it started with hunger, but it ended with heart. Behind her, the door opened. Threx stepped in silently, holding a small data tablet. The council wants you to teach at the academy, he said. To train younglings in, what did they call it? Human values, Mara smiled faintly. You mean compassion, he grunted. Yes, that, she looked at him. You don't believe in it yet, do you? He paused. I didn't. But then I saw how the cubs look at you, like you gave them something even I couldn't, so maybe. I'll learn, Mara nodded. We all will. Threx gave a deep, respectful bow, rare among his kind. Sleep well, human Mara. You too, Commander. As the door closed, the narrator's voice fades in, soft, steady, filled with meaning. In a galaxy ruled by strength, one human reminded them that compassion is not weakness. It is the heartbeat of survival. The cubs would grow strong. The station would remember her name. And somewhere among the stars, hunger gave way to the human heart.